Okay, here we go, Civil War. How many people here know what the object of the Civil War was? Anybody who's heard me, I know, knows it. But isn't the object of a war pretty important? So you know, what's the objective? What are we going to do here? What are we trying to achieve? What's our goal here? Well, they actually had one. And this is Andrew Johnson of Tennessee. He was a senator from Tennessee at the time. And who is this guy? Later President of the United States. He was vice president under Lincoln. And think about that. He was a Democrat. Lincoln was a Republican. Lincoln ran with a Democrat as his vice president candidate. Just think about how times have changed. But here's the object of the war. I'm going to put it it's actually in the Congressional Globe. It's passed in the Senate July 25th, 1861, that this war is not prosecuted upon our part in any spirit of oppression, nor for any purpose of conquest or subjugation. Remember those two words. It's not for any purpose of conquest or subjugation, nor for the purpose of overthrowing or interfering with the rights or established institutions of the states, but to defend and maintain the supremacy of the Constitution and all laws made pursuant thereof, and to preserve the Union with all the dignity, equality, and rights of the several states unimpaired, that as soon as these objects are accomplished, the war ought to cease. Let's break that down. The object of the war was not for oppression, not for any purpose of conquest, not for any purpose of subjugation, not for the purpose of overthrowing or interfering with the rights of those states. It was not for the purpose of overthrowing or interfering with the established institutions of the states, slavery. How many people are taught here that the object of the Civil War, the official object of the Civil War passed in Congress, was not to interfere with the institution of slavery? How many people are taught that? I've got one. And let me think here. I bet you don't go to public school. Some things they said it was to defend and maintain the supremacy of the Constitution and all laws made in pursuance thereof, to preserve the Union with all the dignity of the several states unimpaired, to preserve the Union with all the equality of the several states unimpaired, and to preserve the Union with all the rights of the several states unimpaired. Was this what the object of the war actually proved out to be? No. Was this what it proved not to be? Not to interfere with states' rights, not to maintain the Constitution. Was the Constitution maintained under this? No, it was absolutely destroyed by Lincoln and the 39th Congress. And it was to depopulate the southern states and people them over again. Now, when they're talking about depopulating the southern states, I'm going to explain that because we're going to actually read these words. Are they talking about just getting rid of all the people and killing all the people? Or are they talking about changing the body politic? They're going to depopulate the southern states of one body politic and people them over with another body politic loyal to Washington. But let's read these words. This is John Sherman, senator from Ohio. This is in the floor debate on the object of the war. Okay? And this is said by Mr. Breckinridge, right here you read Mr. Breckinridge of Kentucky, Senator Breckinridge. He's actually quoting a part of the object of the war we just read, and he makes a comment. He says, "I think, sir, that this war is prosecuted according to the purposes of a majority of those who are managing the legislation that leads to its prosecution for objects of subjugation." Now this is being said by a United States Senator, John Breckinridge. He knows what's being said. He knows the feelings and passions of what's going on. He says, "I believe that unless those states which have seceded from the Federal Union lay down their arms and surrender at discretion, the majority in Congress will adhere to no terms of settlement, and that those who may attempt to mediate will speak to the winds." Or Fort Sumter. Congress would not listen to any peace conference coming from the South. They'd turn them away. Before the war started, this is before Fort Sumter. "We're not talking peace to you. We're not talking to you. No intention." And that was from the North. And right here he says that it will mediate to the winds. "I believe, therefore, that the war, in the sense and spirit entertained by these gentlemen, is a war of subjugation. The eminent senator from Ohio, Mr. Sherman, not less conservative than a majority of the organization with which he is connected, went so far in the warmth of his feelings the other day as to declare that unless the people of certain states of the South yielded willing obedience, he would depopulate them and people them over again. That I call not only a war of subjugation, but a war of extermination." July 25th, 1861. This is not post-war. This is in talking about the object of the war before the war really got started. The North's intention, what's being talked about, what they're showing is that they want to depopulate the southern states and make them all loyal to the federal government. Let's go to the war. Here's his brother, William Tecumseh Sherman. Everybody know William? Willie? Here's a letter he wrote. We're in our enemy's country, and I act accordingly. The war will soon assume a turn to extermination. Not of soldiers alone, that is the least part of the trouble, but the people. And who did he send that to? That was just a warm little, hey, darling, here's what we're doing in the South. Let's go to the timeline, the objects of the war, to Reconstruction. We're talking about the politics of the war and the overthrow of body politics. March, April 1861, Lincoln declares the Southern states' ordinances of secession null and void based upon the position that states cannot leave the Union. We're going to discuss all that here later. July of 1861, both houses of Congress passed resolutions clearly stating the object of the war is not for any purpose of conquest or subjugation. April to May 1865, Confederate Army surrenders to overwhelming opposition. December of 1865, the 11 previous Confederate states are considered back in the Union to the degree that they participate in amending the national constitution abolishing slavery. And these are the dates that they all did it. See, North Carolina abolished slavery, passed the 13th Amendment December 4th, 1865. So is North Carolina considered back in the Union in 1865? Yeah, because who's the only entities allowed to look at the Constitution and amend it, or be given potential amendments and pass and ratify them? So if North Carolina is recognized as passing or ratifying the 13th Amendment on December 4th, 1865, are they not recognized as in the Union again? Participating, amending the Constitution, yeah. They're back in the Union, 1865. And isn't that what the object of the war was about? To get the states back in the Union undisturbed. April 2nd, 1866, peace is declared by presidential proclamation. Peace is declared throughout the land. War is over. April 2nd, 1866. 14th Amendment is proposed by the 39th Congress on June 13th, 1866. And what the 14th Amendment did was nationalize citizenship. Change the body politic of all the states from state citizens to citizens subject to Washington. Make them national citizens. You're no longer a state citizen, you are a national citizen. And we're going to explain that, and I actually show that as we go on. So the 14th Amendment was going to make citizenship national because that would give the federal government authority to exercise their power in the states if you're their citizens. These were rejected by Texas, Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia, Louisiana, and it was actually ratified by Tennessee. Tennessee was the only former Confederate state that ratified the 14th Amendment. March 2nd, 1867, the first Reconstruction Act is passed by Congress in times of peace. Remember, peace was declared a year earlier, so it's times of peace. Over the President's veto, the President vetoed the Reconstruction Acts. The act declared that no legal governments exist in any of the former Confederate states, except for Tennessee. Tennessee did not have to go through Reconstruction because they ratified the 14th Amendment. The Reconstruction Acts are based upon the principle of Congress's authority to conquer and subjugate southern states' form of government and citizenry or body politic. So basically, the object of the war is changed 2 years after the war is over and a year after peace is declared. Now, isn't that a good time to change the object of the war? 2 years after it's over? You know, originally it's not for any purpose of conquest or subjugation. War's over, peace is declared. 1867, Congress says, we think this war was prosecuted for conquest. We think we do have the authority to subjugate their citizens. Well, that's what happened. So what happened to the blood that was spilled by the Northern soldiers? Did they fight to conquer states? They fought to preserve the Union with all the dignity, equality, and rights of the several states unimpaired. They fought that the war was not for any purpose of conquest. Well, how do you have a war that's not for any purpose of conquest? The logic and reasoning they used was that the war was against people in rebellion to lawful authority. We have no authority to conquer the corporate body, the state constitution, their laws. What Congress said is this war really is a police action. We want to put these southern states back in, or the people in rebellion to lawful authority, back in under the laws. We're not going to conquer their corporate state. But they changed that 2 years after the war was over. Let's talk about North Carolina. That's where we are, and that's what I'm talking about here. And most people don't know this part of our history. there was a state election, a general election, a vote on whether to hold a convention on secession. So you got to remember, at this point, 7 southern states have seceded. South Carolina in December, and all the deep South states, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Texas, Arkansas, they've all seceded. And so what's North Carolina going to do? We held a state election on whether to hold a convention. Not a state election on whether we're going to secede, but a state election on whether we're even going to discuss secession. We voted it down by 651 votes. We're staying in the Union.
So it's not even an issue.
It's not an issue. We're in the Union. We're in the Union. We've already voted, put it to popular election. Citizens held the belief the federal government could not force one state to wage war on another. So they thought they were operating on the principle that these other southern states could secede. It's a different union. We're staying in the Union. They can secede. They have a right. Because the issue is whether secession is lawful or not. And this was very controversial at the time. What is it? April 12, 1861, Fort Sumter is fired on. April 15, 1861, Lincoln calls on Governor Ellis to provide 2 regiments of troops to put down this rebellion. So now he's saying war is inevitable, and North Carolina must decide whether to fight the North or the South. Who are we going to fight? Now it's going to be a war. Okay, we're in the Union. But do we fight the southern states and go against our beliefs that secession is lawful? Because that's the only reason we'd be fighting them. Well, let's look at what Governor John Ellis wrote back to Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln called for Governor Ellis to provide 2 regiments of troops to put down the rebellion of the seceded states. He says, I can be no party to this wicked violation of the laws of the country and to this war upon the liberties of a free people. You can get no troops from North Carolina. That was our response. Is that a noble response or is that a criminal act? So what did we do? We left the Union because we were forced to either perpetuate the violation of the Constitution by waging war on states, or, you know, it's like if someone says, hey, I got a really good idea. I need some money. Let's go rob a bank. Hop in the car with me. You know, that's Lincoln. Hey, let's go wage war. Governor Ellis, hop in the car. North Carolina, hop in the car with me. We're going to wage war. It's like, whoa. I can't be a part of that wicked action. I can't do that. So did we leave the Union because we loved slavery?
No, actually Ellis was supporting the will of the people. If you go back to the convention, it said we will not wage war on a neighboring state.
Right.
That's what he was doing. He was actually doing the honorable thing because he was representing the people as their executive.
And that's what an executive is supposed to do. Represent the will of the people. So again, get pride in who we are. Don't believe the lies that we are this wicked, North Carolinians, these slave holders, these wicked, vile people, left the Union, waged war with the federal government so we could preserve the institution of slavery. Nothing could be further from the truth.